You were taught that the universe is silent. That meaning must be searched for in books, experts, or systems outside of you. But what if that silence was never real? What if it was taught? There is a forgotten practice older than language, older than religion, one that doesn't ask you to speak, but to listen. Not with your ears, but with something far deeper. Long before humans prayed, before they wrote sacred texts, they knew how to hear the universe respond. They knew the voice of creation was always speaking, guiding, warning, remembering. And when that practice was lost, humanity didn't just lose wisdom, it lost direction. You felt it before, in moments of stillness, in sudden knowing, in the feeling that something unseen was trying to reach you. This is not imagination, it's memory. And once you remember how to listen again, the universe doesn't just speak, it answers. Long before words were written, before temples rose and civilizations recorded their histories, there was a knowledge that humanity carried not in libraries, not in scrolls, but in the quiet rhythm of existence itself. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it resonated in the core of every being. A pulse of connection between the human and the universe. This was the voice of the cosmos, a language older than thought, older than memory, older even than time itself. Every movement of the stars, every sigh of the wind, every heartbeat of the earth carried a message, a pattern, a whisper of something far greater than the fleeting identities we inhabit in this life. And yet, over millennia, humanity forgot. Not by accident, not by misfortune, but because someone, somewhere powerful, decided that such knowledge was too dangerous, too uncontrollable, too liberating. Imagine walking through a world where everything you needed to know was available, not as instruction manuals, not as rules imposed from outside, but as signals, vibrations, frequencies embedded in the very fabric of reality. And you could hear them, not as sound, but as knowing, as guidance, as clarity that arises without explanation. That was the world our ancestors lived in. They knew how to align with it, how to attune to it. They practiced the forgotten art that opens the voice of the universe. A practice so natural that it required no tools, no rituals, no authority figures. And in its simplicity lay its danger, because once a human remembered how to listen, they could not be easily controlled. They could not be told what to fear, what to worship, or how to live. They carried the truth inside them, and the truth was more powerful than kingdoms, armies, or laws. But then, silence began to fall. Not the kind of quiet you find in nature or in meditation, but a silence imposed upon the mind and spirit. Civilization taught obedience, taught distraction, taught that knowledge exists outside of the self. Schools, religions, governments, and social structures became instruments to drown out the subtle voice within, to make the human forget their innate attunement. Imagine a library of infinite wisdom that exists within you, and then imagine that someone came and removed the keys not by destroying the library, but by convincing you that it never existed. That is what happened. The voice of the universe was not destroyed. It was ignored, ridiculed, suppressed. And yet, in spite of it, it has never stopped speaking. You may have felt it without knowing why. That moment when you suddenly knew the answer before the question was even asked. The pull toward a person, a place, a path that seemed impossible to justify. The flashes of insight in dreams that were more real than waking life. The déjà vu that left you shivering with recognition. These were not accidents. They were echoes, remnants of a connection that civilization tried to sever. The voice of the universe has always been there, waiting for you to remember the practice that allows it to be heard. Waiting for you to realize that the chaos, the noise, the endless distractions of modern life are not natural. They are barriers, built not by nature, but by those who would keep you small, compliant, unremembering. And so begins the journey of remembering. The first step is awareness. You must notice the gaps, the silences within your own mind, the questions that have been dismissed as curiosity or coincidence. Why did you feel an unexplainable pull toward certain experiences? Why do some memories feel older than your life? Why do certain patterns repeat, almost as if your soul is echoing previous chapters you cannot consciously recall? These are breadcrumbs. The universe never stops speaking. You were taught to stop listening, and the first step of the forgotten practice is reclaiming your ability to hear. Not with effort, not with seeking, but with surrender. To soften, to notice, to align. Alignment begins with stillness, and not the staged, performative stillness often sold as meditation in modern culture, but a stillness that is honest, raw, and unguarded. A stillness in which your thoughts, your fears, your attachments are acknowledged but not clung to. A space where the mind steps back and the soul steps forward. In this stillness, the frequencies of the universe begin to filter through the static. A thought arises that you cannot explain. A solution appears for a problem that has haunted you for years. A sense of guidance, not from outside, but from within, anchored in a truth older than your own identity. And this is the beginning, the first thread connecting you back to the voice that has always been waiting, but understanding the voice is not instantaneous. Like learning any language, you do not become fluent in a day. The practice requires patience, repetition, and a willingness to unlearn the stories you were told about reality, about who you are, and about what is possible. The world around you will continue to insist that knowledge comes from authority, from texts, from systems designed to separate the individual from the infinite. It will tell you that listening to your inner knowing is foolish, dangerous, or naive. But in truth, it is the most natural and most powerful skill you possess. The universe speaks constantly, but the ability to hear it requires courage, curiosity, and a willingness to remember what was never truly lost. And so, the journey begins not with action, but with attention. Notice the whispers, the signs, the subtle hints that reality itself lays before you. Notice the energy in a place, the subtle pull towards certain people, the resonances that feel inexplicably familiar. Notice your intuition, and do not dismiss it. These are the first sparks of remembrance, the first flickers of a light long hidden. The practice that opens the voice of the universe is simple in form but infinite in depth. It asks you not to follow, not to imitate, not to accumulate knowledge, but to remember, to awaken, to hear. And once you begin to hear, once you become aware of the subtle communication that has always surrounded you, your life begins to change in ways you cannot yet imagine. Long before temples and schools claimed authority over knowledge, before kings and empires dictated what was sacred and what was profane, the human spirit understood a profound truth: that reality is alive, aware, and speaking. The voice of the universe was not a metaphor, it was a living presence, an intelligence that could be heard if one knew how to attune. Ancient cultures across the globe practiced this, knowing in ways we can barely imagine today. The shamans of the Amazon would enter the forests and listen, not for the rustle of leaves alone, but for the intelligence encoded in the patterns of life itself. The sages of India would sit in silence for hours, days, even years, aligning their consciousness with the currents of the cosmos. The Druidic circles in Europe, the mystics of Egypt, the elders of Aboriginal Australia, they all shared a singular understanding that a voice exists beyond the noise of human thought, and it is accessible to anyone who remembers how to listen. But then, as humanity grew more complex, more organized, more driven by power, that knowledge became dangerous. Not dangerous in its effect on nature, but dangerous to authority, because someone who could hear the voice of the universe could no longer be controlled by systems of fear, obedience, or illusion. Such a person could discern truth beyond doctrine. They could act not out of compulsion, but out of insight. They could navigate the world with wisdom unmediated by the labels of society. And this, over time, was deemed unacceptable. Sacred practices were stripped away, oral traditions silenced, and the keys to listening were hidden behind the veil of ritual, language, or hierarchy. What was once natural became secret. What was once intuitive became exclusive. And yet, the voice never stopped. It persisted, hidden in fragments, whispering through dreams, intuition, synchronicities, and the uncanny moments of life where reason fails, but knowing prevails. Even when civilizations tried to suppress it, even when libraries burned and oral traditions were erased, the intelligence of the cosmos remained accessible, waiting for those who would remember, waiting for the souls brave enough to seek not answers imposed from outside, but resonance from within. Every unexplainable coincidence, every sudden insight, every pull toward a place or a person without logical reason is a reminder that the universe has never stopped speaking. You have simply been distracted from hearing. This is where the forgotten practice comes in. It is not a ceremony performed with elaborate tools or mystical incantations. It is not something that requires validation from a teacher, a priest, or a sacred text. It is a practice of presence, of attunement, of surrendering the mind enough to let the subtle currents of the universe register in your consciousness. The ancients called it by many names: listening, stilling, attuning, alignment. Modernity forgot the names, but the essence remains unchanged. The practice asks you to create a space, a quiet within your mind and body, where the noise of external expectations falls away, where the habitual patterns of thought, judgment, and distraction no longer dictate your perception. And in that space, the universe begins to speak again. But this speaking is unlike any sound you are accustomed to. It does not arrive as words or sentences. It arrives as sensation, as clarity, as resonance. It is the knowing that rises unbidden, the certainty that something is true before proof exists. It is the recognition of patterns in your life, the sudden understanding of choices you never consciously made, the sense that your soul remembers far more than your conscious mind can grasp. This is why the practice is both simple and infinitely profound. Anyone can begin it, yet few fully master it, not because the universe hides its voice, but because the conditioning of centuries has dulled human receptivity. The mind is trained to reject, the heart is trained to doubt, the spirit is trained to forget. And so, the practice begins with undoing, with peeling away the layers of disbelief, distraction, and habituation that obscure your natural attunement. To reclaim this ability, one must first cultivate stillness. Not a stillness forced by discipline alone, but a stillness that arises from willingness, the willingness to stop chasing, to stop judging, to stop trying to manufacture understanding. In this stillness, the body becomes quiet, the mind softens, and the soul steps forward. Awareness turns inward, and subtle signals begin to emerge. A memory surfaces, a thought arises without origin, a feeling intensifies for reasons you cannot yet explain. These are the first signs that the practice is taking root. The voice of the universe speaks not as a command, but as a guide, offering insight, nudging attention, revealing patterns previously unnoticed. And every time you respond with attentiveness, with openness, the resonance grows stronger. The ancient texts, scattered across continents and cultures, hint at this practice repeatedly. The Egyptian Book of Thoth speaks of wisdom hidden in symbols, accessible only to those who attune themselves to the rhythms of creation. The Vedic traditions of India describe states of consciousness where the self dissolves into the infinite, allowing the intelligence of the cosmos to be experienced directly. The Aboriginal Dreamtime holds stories of ancestors walking not just in physical reality, but through layers of existence where every event carries meaning, guidance, and memory. These are not myths. They are instructions encoded in narrative form for those prepared to perceive. They teach that the universe is not silent, and that listening is not passive. It is an active engagement of attention, intention, and presence. Yet, modern life constantly tests this practice. The barrage of information, the demands of productivity, the noise of human interaction, the conditioning to seek answers externally, all conspire to make listening difficult. And this difficulty is not coincidence. It is the continuation of the same suppression that has existed for centuries. A world that wants control cannot afford widespread attunement. For when individuals begin to hear for themselves, when they reconnect to the intelligence of the universe, they no longer rely on external authorities. They no longer accept imposed narratives. They no longer serve systems that demand obedience. And so, learning to listen is an act of reclamation, a revolutionary act disguised as stillness. And even as you hear this, even as you read these words, fragments of your own memory may begin to stir. Moments in your life that felt like accidents or chance may begin to take on new meaning. That unexplainable choice you made, that sudden decision that altered your path, that dream so vivid it seemed real. These are all signs, echoes of a practice your soul has never truly forgotten. The voice of the universe has been reaching toward you your entire life, in whispers you could almost ignore. The forgotten practice is simply the method of listening, of remembering how to hear what has always been present. And the moment you begin, you realize that the world has never been silent. You were just not listening. The forgotten practice that opens the voice of the universe is not merely a technique. It is a pathway, a living bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between what you call reality and the infinite intelligence that surrounds it. It has existed in every era, in every culture, yet it has always been hidden in plain sight. Ancient peoples knew its power. They did not need written instructions because the practice was encoded into their very way of being. Their daily lives, their rituals, their movements, even their relationship to nature were expressions of an inner attunement that allowed them to hear and respond to the universe's subtle whispers. The shamans, the mystics, the sages, all were simply those who remembered, those who cultivated their awareness, until the ordinary became extraordinary, until silence became voice. Imagine a time when the world was alive in ways most have forgotten. Rivers were not merely water, they were currents of wisdom, carrying messages from mountains, forests, and the creatures that dwelled within them. Trees were not just plants. They were sentinels, their rings, branches, and roots, a living library of the Earth's memory. The sky was not empty. The stars were a chorus, singing the story of existence to those who could hear. In that world, listening was not optional. It was survival, it was knowledge, it was life itself. And yet, this intimate relationship with the intelligence of all things was slowly undermined. Knowledge that was once communal became secret. Awareness that was once natural became disciplined, controlled, and confined to those deemed worthy. What was deemed dangerous was not the knowledge itself, but the freedom it gave. For the human who could truly hear, the universe could not be bound by the illusions of hierarchy, wealth, or social expectation. They understood patterns of cause and effect not as abstract philosophy, but as lived truth. They could see the ripples of their actions through time, not with the eyes of judgment, but with the perception of resonance. They could navigate life not by fear, not by obligation, but by alignment. By attuning their choices to the voice that had always spoken, even when the world was silent. And this, centuries later, is exactly what you have been cut off from. The practice itself is deceptively simple, though deceptively powerful. It begins with presence. Presence is not a word. It is a state where your mind does not chatter with incessant what-ifs, where your heart does not cling to fear or expectation, where your body and spirit soften into a receptivity that has been dormant for lifetimes. This is why those who attempt the practice with effort, with striving, or with the desire to control, often find failure. The universe does not respond to force. It responds to alignment, to sincerity, to openness. It responds to the quiet willingness to allow yourself to be a vessel for something greater than your conditioned self. In the ancient world, this practice was woven into daily life. Morning rituals were not merely symbolic, they were exercises in attuning attention. Breath, movement, observation. Each was a tool to tune the senses and the consciousness into the currents of creation. The mystics would observe the patterns of clouds, the flight of birds, the behavior of animals, recognizing the intelligence of the natural world as a reflection of the greater cosmic intelligence. Their meditation was not a retreat from life. It was a calibration, a tuning of their inner resonance to match the field of intelligence that surrounds all things. And when they achieved alignment, They did not hear in words. They knew. They understood. They acted in harmony with life itself, and the world responded in kind. But as civilization centralized, as knowledge became power, and as external authority replaced internal guidance, this practice was suppressed. Sacred knowledge was hoarded by priests, kings, and rulers, hidden behind complex rituals or cloaked in language that only the initiated could decode. Practices that once belonged to the collective were privatized. The natural attunement of humanity was diminished, replaced with dependence on authority, obedience to law, and adherence to systems of reward and punishment. The result was a humanity disconnected from the subtle intelligence of life itself, cut off from a voice that had never stopped speaking, waiting only for ears willing to hear. Yet the universe is patient. Even when centuries of suppression have dulled human perception, the voice still finds a way. You have experienced it without knowing. Those moments of uncanny insight, sudden clarity, or unexplainable guidance are not accidents. They are fragments of the practice resurfacing, echoes of a skill your soul has never truly lost. They are reminders that the voice of the universe is always available, that the barriers imposed by culture and conditioning are not absolute, and that the forgotten practice can be reclaimed. This is not mystical fantasy. It is memory. And memory, once awakened, is unstoppable. To engage in this practice, you must first cultivate receptivity. Receptivity is not passivity. It is not idle waiting. It is the active, deliberate state of softening your mind and body, letting go of expectation and attuning to subtler frequencies. It is learning to feel the vibrations of reality, to recognize resonance in everything from the people you meet to the patterns in your day, to the silence between thoughts. And when you do, the universe begins to respond. It speaks not in words, but in alignment, in synchrony, in signs that cannot be ignored. You start noticing that your decisions are guided not by fear or habit, but by intelligence you cannot claim as your own. You begin to participate in a conversation that has been ongoing long before your birth, a dialogue between your consciousness and the infinite field of intelligence. And here's the paradox. The simpler the practice appears, the more profound it is. No tools are required. No ritualized formulas. No external validation. All that is necessary is the willingness to listen. This willingness is rare in a world conditioned for distraction, and that rarity is why the practice has always been hidden. Not because it is complicated, but because it is too powerful to be universal. The human who remembers how to listen changes everything. Their perception, their actions, and their energy ripple outward, touching others, shifting realities, rewriting unseen patterns. And this is the threshold we are approaching. The first conscious steps toward reclaiming an art humanity almost forgot. The voice of the universe waiting to be recognized once again. Once you understand that the universe has never stopped speaking, the question becomes simple. How do you hear it? The answer, though, is both simple and profound. You do not need a teacher, a temple, or a secret mantra handed down through generations. The key has always been within you, encoded in your very being, waiting for the moment your awareness softens enough to perceive it. Modern life, with its relentless noise and constant demands, has trained humans to ignore subtlety, to dismiss intuition, to mistake quiet knowing for coincidence or imagination. Yet the voice is always present. It speaks in the spaces between thought, in the pauses of perception, in the resonance of your own energy aligning with life itself. And once you begin listening, the universe responds with astonishing precision, offering guidance, clarity, and insight that can feel like magic but is nothing more than remembering. The practice begins with intention. It is not enough to simply sit in silence or close your eyes. Your consciousness must be directed, focused, attuned. Think of it as a tuning fork, a way to calibrate your own frequency to match the subtle signals the universe has been sending all along. This requires patience, because the mind will resist. Old patterns of doubt, fear, and distraction arise as walls, insisting that the voice you seek does not exist, that the insights you receive are coincidence, that your own knowing is unreliable. These walls are not obstacles, they are echoes of the suppression that has existed for centuries. They are memories embedded in the collective human experience, waiting to be acknowledged, not fought, not denied, but seen and released. In practice, one begins with breath. Breath is the bridge between body and consciousness, between the visible and the invisible. Deep, intentional breathing slows the mind, allowing awareness to shift from the constant chatter of the external world into the inner field where subtlety resides. With each inhale, you draw in not just air, but alignment. With each exhale, you release attachment, resistance, and the patterns that obscure perception. In this state, the body begins to resonate with frequencies it has long ignored, and the whispers of the universe begin to emerge as impressions, images, emotions, or sudden clarity that defy rational explanation. But breath alone is not enough. The next step is attention. Attention is not judgment, not control, not an effort to force results. Attention is a gentle awareness of what is arising, a soft observation of sensations, thoughts, and feelings, allowing the subtle currents of reality to flow into perception without interference. You may notice a memory surface that feels older than this life. You may feel a pull toward a person, a place, or an idea you cannot logically explain. You may experience a flash of understanding in a dream, or in the quietest moment of your day. These are not random, they are the language of the universe, and the first real signs that the forgotten practice is beginning to take root. Ancient traditions provide guidance for refining this skill. In India, sages practiced extended meditation, often in silence and isolation, learning to distinguish between the noise of the mind and the whispers of cosmic intelligence. In Egypt, initiates spent hours in sacred spaces observing the subtle interplay of light, shadow, and geometry, attuning to the rhythms of existence itself. In the Amazon, shamans worked with the plants, the elements, and the rhythms of the earth, listening to the messages encoded in every vibration of life. All of these approaches, diverse as they seem, share a single principle: listening requires alignment. The voice of the universe responds not to force, but to resonance, not to expectation, but to sincerity, not to analysis, but to presence. The modern seeker may have to navigate distractions unimaginable to the ancients. Screens, notifications, schedules, and endless chatter pull attention outward, leaving little space for inner attunement. Yet even now, access is possible. You can reclaim this practice through daily dedication to stillness, even if only for a few minutes. Begin by creating sacred space within your day, a moment where no obligations, no judgments, and no distractions exist. Sit quietly, close your eyes, focus on breath, and ask a question. Not a question that seeks proof, control, or certainty, but a question that invites guidance. What do I need to remember? Where is my attention most needed? What patterns are repeating in my life? Then listen. Listen with all of yourself, not your rational mind, not your ego, not your habits, but your presence, your awareness, your soul. Responses rarely arrive as words. They arrive as knowing, as a sense, as resonance. A sudden insight, a shift in energy, a feeling in the body that aligns with truth. Sometimes it appears in a dream or a synchronicity that cannot be ignored. Sometimes it arrives in the form of clarity during ordinary activities, a moment of recognition that you have never seen before. These are the language of the universe, subtle and profound, waiting for the human willing to attune. Each time you honor the signal, each time you respond, your frequency adjusts, your sensitivity increases, and the voice becomes clearer, more precise, more intimate. The power of the practice lies not only in the insights it offers, but in its transformative effect. Once you remember how to listen, life itself becomes a dialogue. Challenges are no longer obstacles, but messages. Conflicts are not attacks, but mirrors reflecting patterns to be understood and released. Decisions are no longer blind, but informed by an intelligence greater than the self. And the most remarkable revelation is that this intelligence is not foreign, it is not outside you, it is your own consciousness. Aligned with the universal field, remembering what it has always known but was trained to forget. This is the essence of the forgotten practice. Reclamation of voice, of knowing, of connection. It is a return to an ancient alignment, a resonance with intelligence that transcends time, culture, and circumstance. It is the restoration of the dialogue humanity once knew intuitively, before centuries of distraction and suppression. And for those willing to commit to presence, breath, and attention, it is not only accessible, it is inevitable. The voice of the universe does not discriminate. It does not favor the learned, the wealthy, or the powerful. It responds to sincerity, curiosity, and willingness. It has always been speaking, and it will continue to speak, whether you are ready or not. And here is the secret. The first moments of listening are only the beginning. As your attention deepens, as your awareness grows, the signals become richer, more detailed, and more transformative. You begin to recognize patterns across your life, echoes of past experiences, karmic loops, and soul-level agreements. You begin to perceive guidance not as abstract advice, but as an architecture of life, showing you where your energy is best applied, where your choices align with evolution, where your attention brings harmony or dissonance. In other words, the practice does not merely inform, it transforms. As you deepen into the forgotten practice, something remarkable begins to unfold. It is subtle at first, a shift in perception, a quiet rearrangement of your inner world. Ordinary moments gain weight, significance, and clarity. Conversations resonate differently. Patterns in your life become visible without effort. The pull of intuition grows stronger and more consistent. You begin to notice that the world is speaking to you in ways you could not perceive before. Not through noise, judgment, or drama, but through subtle nudges, synchronicities, and the vibrations of life itself. This is the awakening phase. The moment when presence becomes practice and practice becomes living reality. The universe does not shout, it whispers. And those whispers, when consistently attended to, form a language that transcends words. You feel it in your body first, a tightening, a release, a pulse that seems to respond to invisible currents. You see it in your mind as clarity without analysis, insight without reasoning. And most importantly, you feel it in your soul. A recognition that this intelligence is not foreign, but your own consciousness, aligned with the infinite. In this state, fear loses its grip. Confusion begins to dissolve. The patterns that once seemed random or overwhelming become instructions, lessons, and guides. You are no longer a passive participant in life, you are a conscious co-creator, responding to the intelligence that has always spoken. At this stage, the practice reveals one of its most profound truths. The voice of the universe is inseparable from your own. The separation you once felt between self and cosmos, mind and spirit, reality and consciousness begins to dissolve. You realize that intuition, insight, and resonance are not special gifts reserved for the few. They are natural faculties of your being, waiting only for attention, courage, and stillness. And the moment you recognize this, life changes fundamentally. Decisions become informed not by fear or habit, but by awareness. Relationships shift as you recognize patterns that no longer serve and energies that must be honored. Work, creativity, and daily choices all begin to resonate with alignment rather than obligation. Ancient teachers knew this phase as the opening of the inner ear. It is the point where the practice ceases to be an exercise and becomes a living dialogue. In India, the yogis spoke of the soundless vibration of truth Nada Brahma as the source of all creation. In Egypt, the priests of Thoth described accessing the inner voice of the cosmos as a direct communion with divine intelligence. Indigenous elders have always maintained that listening to life itself, the wind, the water, the movement of animals, is not symbolic but literal. These traditions converge on a single truth. The voice of the universe is accessible, always present, and not outside you. The challenge is simply remembering how to hear. This remembering brings profound empowerment. You begin to understand that life is not a series of random events, but a continuum of intelligence, resonance, and consequence. Karma Soul contracts and energy patterns are no longer abstract concepts. They are lived realities, perceptible through alignment. You start noticing how certain challenges recur in different forms, how lessons echo across time, how your choices ripple outward beyond what the eye can see. This awareness is not burdensome, it is liberating. It reveals that you have never been powerless. You have simply been listening through the static of conditioning, and now the channels are opening. The practice also brings what many have sought for lifetimes but rarely find: clarity of purpose. In the stillness, in the attention to resonance, your soul begins to whisper its intentions. You may experience sudden insight about your path, your work, or your relationships. You may realize that the fears holding you back are illusions, patterns repeating from cycles long past. You may perceive opportunities you had ignored, or intuitively resistances you had accepted. All of this is the universe guiding you not as a distant authority, but as a mirror of your own consciousness, reflecting what you are capable of remembering and reclaiming. And yet, this awakening is not instantaneous. It is gradual, like a river carving a canyon over millennia. Moments of clarity come and go. Resistance will arise. Doubt will surface. Old conditioning may tug at your awareness, but the practice does not demand perfection. It demands persistence, presence, and sincerity. Each moment you choose to listen, each instant you honor the subtle whispers, your resonance strengthens. Over time, the voice becomes more vivid, more precise, more undeniable. You begin to navigate life not from reaction, but from alignment with the intelligence that has always been present. There is also a collective dimension to this awakening. As individuals attune to the universe, their resonance affects the field around them. Energy, attention, and consciousness are not contained within the self, they ripple outward, interacting with the energy of others, influencing decisions, perceptions, and circumstances in subtle but profound ways. One person awakening to the voice of the universe becomes a beacon, a catalyst for those around them. Relationships deepen, creativity expands, understanding grows. The practice, once thought personal and hidden, reveals itself as inherently communal, a way in which individual attunement contributes to collective intelligence. This is why the practice has been guarded, obscured, and suppressed throughout history. A society of people fully attuned to the universe cannot be controlled through fear, obligation, or illusion. Their lives are guided by resonance, clarity, and awareness. They do not obey without understanding, and they do not participate in cycles that no longer serve evolution. To awaken in this way is not rebellion in the ordinary sense, it is remembrance, and remembrance is inherently transformative. It shifts not only the individual, but the systems they inhabit. The final truth of the first phase of awakening is perhaps the most humbling. The universe speaks through simplicity. It does not require grandeur, ritual, or external validation. It asks only for presence. Breath, attention, and intention are sufficient. The voice is patient, the guidance continuous, and the resonance undeniable once recognized. And with each step, the practitioner discovers that life itself is an infinite conversation, that every choice, every perception, every emotion is part of a dialogue with intelligence far greater than the self, yet inseparable from it. The journey has now entered a new phase, the embodiment of listening. It is no longer enough to practice quietly in meditation. The awareness begins to infuse daily life. Decisions are made with clarity. Actions resonate with integrity. Relationships flow with understanding. Challenges become lessons rather than obstacles. And most importantly, the practitioner begins to recognize their power not as control over the world, but as alignment with the intelligence that animates it. This is the threshold. The moment where knowledge ceases to be theoretical and becomes living, breathing experience. The final stage of the forgotten practice is embodiment, the point where listening becomes living. The voice of the universe no longer whispers in rare moments. It flows through your decisions, your relationships, your work, and even the smallest movements of your day. Challenges no longer feel like obstacles, they are invitations to align, to recognize patterns, to act from resonance rather than fear. Every thought, every choice, every interaction becomes a dialogue with intelligence far greater than your individual self, yet inseparable from it. In this state, life ceases to be a series of random events. It becomes a living reflection of your awareness, your alignment, and your courage to remember what has always been within you. This embodiment is not reserved for mystics or sages, it is your birthright. The universe does not discriminate. It responds to sincerity, to intention, to presence. Each time you pause, breathe, and attune, you are stepping into a frequency that has been waiting for you. You are reclaiming a practice humanity almost forgot, restoring a connection that transforms not only your own life, but the world around you. The more you listen, the more the universe speaks, and the more you act in harmony with the intelligence that has always been guiding you. Now is the moment to step fully into this practice. Stop waiting for permission. Stop seeking external validation. Begin listening, begin remembering, and allow the voice of the universe to guide your life. If this message resonates, take the first step today. Pause, breathe, and ask the universe a question. Align with your intuition. Journal what arises, and notice the subtle guidance flowing into your life. Your journey has already begun. Reclaim your voice. Reclaim your life. The universe has been waiting to speak to you.